So I appreciate your patience while you're waiting for everyone else to get a part. We may still have a few latecomers as well, but they can just enter while we're going. And to start off with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of land that we meet on today of the Kaurna people and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. A few housekeeping rules. Toilets facilities are located across the foyer along with tea, coffee and water is over there. If there's a fire, fire warden, there's Renee at the back with your hand. And basically the meeting space is across the road in the car park. So we probably have to sit on a car or something in the event of emergency because there's so many out there. I'm Melissa from CCF, for those of you who don't know me, I'm pretty sure everyone does. This session is being recorded. I would also like to thank and introduce Greg Hill. Greg has some history with CCF, so he understands our membership really well. He actually worked here for a short period of time, many years ago, even before me. So we're really lucky to have him on board as a CCF member now to assist you guys with all of your internet needs. And then, of course, there's lovely Mignon over there, who was an industry steward. She worked here for 10 and a bit years and finished 4 years ago. Mignon is brilliant, I absolutely adore her, and I've definitely had big shoes to fill stepping into her role since she left. So on that note, I would like to introduce you to Greg, hand over to him, and let's learn how we can F our businesses up with just one click. Cool.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thanks everyone for being here. I thought I'd start today's discussion with a question, and that is, would you have unprotected sex with random strangers in the middle of the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s? Does anyone want to buy into that? No, it's probably an obvious question. The reality is that without realising it, that's what a lot of businesses are essentially doing with their business. They're probably not aware of the risks of what's going on, but that's essentially the sort of risk that they're exposing themselves to with their information management systems. I guess for me it all started I guess back many years ago. I had a situation, I was doing some consulting work with a particular company. They had their own IT company at the time. We were there engaged to do some other work, so create documents and that sort of thing. I'd kind of pushed them into using a particular system. If you're familiar with Dropbox, it was like that. We're a reseller of that product at the time. So just for sheer convenience, we decided to get them to use this product, and then we could collaborate on documents and work together. Unbeknownst to me, they decided to put their whole information system, all of their documents, their whole business into this system, which was never part of the scope. And then sometime after that, they rang me and said, and it was one of those terrible phone calls, they said, we know it's not your problem, but we've lost access to all our files. Is there anything you can do? Now, the interesting part about that was I was reselling a product that I was told that was completely robust and secure in regards to ransomware and malware and this sort of stuff. And of course I said, sure, no problem. We'll be able to recover all that. I know your current IT provider won't be able to do that, but we'll be able to do it. Turns out it wasn't so easy. Even though we were told absolutely that this system would be able to survive an attack, it's actually not until you go through one and have the experience and realise that you do the restore and it doesn't come back, and you realise, hang on, we've got a real problem. The sophistication of these things are way more intense than what they were years ago. So just because somebody tells you that your system's going to be able to be recovered doesn't mean anything. Fortunately, the complicated outcome of that story was we actually were able to, through some sort of back-end magic, we were able to access the source files, we were able to get this business up and running, and we were able to restore them. It took a lot of effort and a lot of money to do that, so it wasn't just a simple click. So I guess the message out of all of that, we all need to be vigilant, that we're not just expecting or accepting people's word for things when they say, yeah, it'll be fine, because quite often that's not actually the case. Just to give you some background on us, we're a Microsoft partner. We're also a member of the Australian Cyber Security Centre. So we are very much involved in this type of activities on a daily basis. And I guess the core value of us is that we believe that losing control of your data is optional. So that's kind of one of our core messages we like to educate the market with. People ask me that quite often they're not really sure exactly what cybersecurity is. The best definition that I've come across is that cybersecurity is the practice of defending your business from malicious digital attacks. Something a core message I like to present in these meetings is that cybersecurity is a business problem, not an IT problem. Who agrees with that? Anyone disagree? Yeah, so quite often these things are pushed down to the IT department. It's considered not an issue for the whole organisation, and you know, you're putting a massive responsibility on a small group of people. So really it's about the whole business embracing this. And really when you're looking at managing your data and your information, there's also a whole bunch of other things to consider. So, you know, for instance, if you've got people with printed forms and documents hanging around, that's another issue that you really need to be aware of that can be a source of trouble. Our view is that cybersecurity is basically a protection, you know, for your revenue. So it's that silent protector there, and it's really important to keep that business running. Another interesting fact is that most companies that have had a cybersecurity breach already have an IT partner or an internal person, and you know, they've probably been in a situation that they're being told everything's fine. So I'll show you the numbers in a minute as to how prevalent the problem is, and that's the thing to keep in mind, is these businesses that you see that are out in the news, they're quite often, they've already got people allegedly looking after it. Another interesting fact, this organisation did some research, and Broadcom, and they identified that actually smaller organisations, which is the 1 to 250 employees, are actually the most targeted for cyber attacks. Is that a surprise to anyone? No, not a surprise? Why do we think that might be the case? Anyone got a view? Yeah?
Because smaller organisations probably have a less sophisticated defence system for cyber attacks.
Absolutely, yep, that's absolutely a very good point. Everybody hears about the big organisations, the multinationals that get attacked in the media, but people don't hear about the most common target, and they're typically the smaller organisations. Another interesting thing, Joe Stewart-Rattay from the Australian Computer Society, which is kind of like the industry group for IT right through Australia. She came out and she said when lockdown started happening last year, we saw ransomware attacks increase by over 300%. So that's a massive increase. This is from the ACCC, some data over the last 10 years, and you can see that it doesn't matter which way you look at it, it's a definite increase. It's definitely increasing quite a bit. There's also some data from the National Vulnerability Database, and I would argue, and basically what this talks about is software vulnerabilities, and I would argue that there seems to be an interesting correlation between the shape of that curve and the shape of that curve. So not only is it becoming an ever-increasing thing for people to get involved in, such as, I understand, mafias, etc., have moved out of extortion and prostitution and now into, you know, cybersecurity attacks because it's easier and they can make more money. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the hacking groups later. Again, from the e-crime index from a worldwide organisation called CrowdStrike, they actually track very specifically where the threats are coming from, who's committing the threats, etc. And it doesn't matter which way you look at it. Yes?
Sorry, why did the lockdown present, you know, such a rise, and what was the
reason is, well, one of the reasons is because whereas traditionally a lot of businesses had that physical presence in an office, and their infrastructure was defended by physical walls and barriers, and a lot of the, you know, on-premise equipment was running. With pushing people to go to the cloud, what they did, or pushing them to work from home, it meant they needed to adopt the cloud without a very planned approach. So they just turned on access to a wide range of people. They're suddenly working from home, and they don't have the normal security and processes in place that you should have, whether you're working in office or you've rolled out the adoption to the cloud properly. The other thing is that you quite often got a situation where people just quickly, they give them access to these systems, and they're using PCs, for instance, that their kids use to download movies, or they're downloading games and screensavers and things. So they're full of malware, particularly already, and they're downloading documents, sensitive information, because they use their browser to access a file. They save it locally on the machine. They don't delete it. So then it's there's all sorts of security issues by not controlling that environment. So yeah, that's some of the reasons. Has anyone here been affected by cyber attacks? So I guess it might be you personally. It might be your business, or it might be your customers or suppliers. Can I just see a show of hands? Has anyone? So pretty much, half the group there's had some experience with someone being affected to do with cyber attacks, and typically it's quite devastating. There's been countless stories in the media and freight companies, etc., being attacked multiple times, and it just really totally interrupts their business and your business. Anyone that's actually involved in that. One of the other factors to keep in mind, I'm not trying to sell you anything here, I'm just trying to educate people because they're not aware of the differences there. So we're all familiar with Office 365. We understand that recently there's a product being released called Microsoft 365. I would argue that they're not equal. Office 365 and Microsoft 365 are not necessarily equal. There's a whole lot of extra stuff in the Microsoft 365 space, and I would say that Office is now a subset of that bigger picture. So what that means, so they're both branded under Microsoft 365, but they're not necessarily the same thing. So the devil's in the detail there. What that means to you is, and the reason I bring this up, very recently we get asked to go into customers' premises and look at their cybersecurity. I had a very challenging conversation with one of their internal IT people that are saying, no, it's fine, we're on the basic system and it's all okay. The problem is that all the advanced security and device management is actually only in the more expensive packages. So if you've been on Microsoft Office 365 for 5 or 10 years, quite often the people that are doing that are actually under one of these lower packages, and it doesn't come with the advanced features, so you're not protected. So it's one of those things that people are just assuming that they're fine, and they're actually, in a lot of cases, they're not. So what does that mean? Security is not included in the older or cheaper packages, and that it's not turned on by default. So that's a couple of things to keep in mind as to why people are particularly vulnerable. And again, if they've been in a situation on some of the cheaper packages, they've been pushed to work from home, then it's a high risk situation for them. I've made a statement why IT partners are not on top of cybersecurity. Some of them are, but there's quite a lot of them that are not on top of cybersecurity. They're often too busy fixing email signatures and resetting passwords to actually worry about the proactive work you need to do to set up cybersecurity. Things have changed over the years, and they've not had time to implement good solid foundations for a protected system, which is required for the new packages. And they've not charged for the additional work, and they're often too embarrassed to have the conversation with the customer and say, look, it's going to cost more per month, and we've got to set it all up. And it's going to take longer, and it's going to cost more. To give you some idea, if we're setting up the advanced security for Microsoft 365, it takes about 14 hours plus half an hour per user. So if you've got 20 people, that's another 10 hours, so about 24 hours. So, we're going to ask for that to be paid. So that's going to be a reasonable sized bill that you're going to notice, right? So a lot of MSPs haven't had that conversation with their customers. They haven't gone down that path, and they haven't set that up. So certainly something to keep in mind. So I would say throughout this presentation, I've got a bunch of slides of things to ask your current IT partner or your internal IT person. And I suggest grabbing them by the shirt like this when you do that. And that is, can I please see the bill for advanced security and device management for my business? So what you're saying is, you might ask them, have we set this up? And they'll say yes. I'll say, okay, can I see the bill for it? Because if they've done it and they haven't charged you, I'd be suspicious that it hasn't been done. is kind of the message there. Unless they're really generous, in which case that's great. All right, I just got a couple of videos that I'd like to quickly show you. So if you just bear with me while I had this all working before we started, but like everything, things change. Okay, so this just goes for a few minutes, just gives us a bit of background.
We're all guilty of not updating our devices, systems and software. When we're busy working hard in the business, it's easier and quicker to just put it off. But right now, we can exclusively reveal, thanks to our ethical hacker, the devastating effect using out-of-date and non-updated technology can have on your business. It happens every day. We're made aware of available updates, but even if it's labelled critical, we think, what's the worst that can happen? Well, we can show you from our hacker's point of view. Even in today's modern world, as soon as a new system, service or piece of software is created, there are people looking for ways to hack it. Right now, you're looking at Eternal Blue, developed to exploit a vulnerability in some versions of Microsoft products. The updates your computer tells you about contain vital patches to secure these vulnerabilities as soon as they're discovered. In this case, here's an older version of a Windows server that hasn't yet been updated. Our hacker uses some special monitoring software to identify the target machine, establish a connection by linking IP addresses and ports, then with a simple command, view all the private credentials used to access the network. Our hacker can then do whatever they want. Launch a further attack, steal and lock your data, run some code to monitor your screen, even detect keystrokes, or spy on you and your staff with your webcam. All businesses rely so much on technology these days, so talk to us about how you can be better protected without having to do the work yourself.
Okay, so that was just explaining the importance of why people need to do updates, and you need to, I hear quite often that people can't be bothered updating their computer and restarting it and that sort of stuff. You really have about 2 days to get the updates done before you are starting to be at risk. What is the cost? According to the Australian Cyber Security Centre, look, the numbers vary depending on different sources. It doesn't matter, they're all huge. So that's the message there. $29 billion to the Australian economy. And from April to June, 7.6 billion to the Australian business. So it's costing a lot of money. Some of the, I guess I've got a few examples here. One that's pretty close to home. This is actually in this industry, so it's probably pretty relevant. We actually did the forensic investigation on this one. Essentially, there is a lot of government grants going around at the moment. They're being promoted heavily on websites. So cricket club, netball club, that sort of activity. So then what happens is that they're run by volunteers. They're typically using very old, outdated email solutions. In this case, it was Big Pond. And as part of the Australian Cyber Security Centre, we see this come up a lot. I would be keeping away from Big Pond email addresses. Would be my what I would recommend. In this particular case, what happened was that the netball club, one of the volunteers was infiltrated, and there was one of the scams where they did the changing the invoice details, and $154,000 was transferred overseas. The other thing with these sort of things is that the people executing this understand Australian business, they understand Australian banking, they understand Australian law better than most of us. So it's very typical to happen on a Thursday night. There's a 72-hour window that you've got to be able to recover the funds. So what happens is if they do it on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday happens, you come in Monday, you realise there's a problem, too late, it's gone, there's pretty much nothing you can do. So like I said, that was in the news. My Budget, you might have heard about also recently in South Australia, South Australian company. The They were attacked by ransomware. One of the interesting things, I had a conversation with the chief, I think he's a CTO, Chief Technology Officer. He's certainly involved in all the infrastructure and IT. He was saying they had everything backed up and totally knew that everything was going to survive this. They were totally prepared for this sort of thing. Well, so they thought. Turns out they didn't have everything backed up. And it was only when they went to restore it that they realised there were some critical pieces missing. They had the biggest bits covered, but the problem is there was a few bits in the middle that weren't backed up. And the net effect of that is they were flying people around Australia back into Adelaide to try and work 24/7 to get their business up and running again. The interesting thing about this is that this was reported on the 15th of May, but they've been hacked. Then on the 3rd of June, it was reported that not only were they hacked, but the information that was stolen was being offered on the dark web for sale. So if you think about, My Budget's business, that's a lot of personal data. That's, their banking details, the bill details, credit cards, presumably a whole lot of personal detail is for sale on the web. Now, I would suggest that is likely to have a reputational damage issue to My Budget. I don't know. I guess there's going to be two types of people that would, go forward from here. People that would go, well, maybe they've got their systems under control now, and others going, I'm not going to risk that again. Either way, reputational damage is something to consider with these type of attacks. There's been a lot of talk recently about Accenture coming to Adelaide, and there's 2,000 jobs, and they're in the IT industry and consulting and stuff. Even they have been subject to a $50 million ransomware attack. And again, client information was stolen. So that's not the sort of stuff you want to get out. And here it is on the web for sale. So not only do they lock up your files and hold you to ransom, if you don't pay the ransom, they'll just release all that stuff on the dark web. You can readily buy this if you've got enough bitcoins. The scary part about this was that it was said allegedly it's an inside job. So I don't know any more details on that. I don't know what the outcome is, but that's certainly what's being talked about in the media at the moment. So I guess a question that I like to also ask people like yourself is not just when you're thinking about external threats, but how do you handle internal threats? Years ago, and I've spoken to people that they say, well, we had a sales rep come here and join our organisation. They downloaded all our customer data on a USB stick, and they went to the competitors, and now they're attacking us. That's optional. You don't need to allow situations. There is the suite of products now. You can actually prevent that situation. You can actually stop emails being sent to forwarded, information being forwarded. You can stop USB sticks being copied to. You can actually create sensitivity labels in your business, so only the key people can access that information. There's a number of techniques. But again, a lot of people don't know this is available, and yes, it does cost more money to set it up, but then what's the damage worth? So that's something to keep in mind. This is just something I found out of the paper while I was waiting to get a coffee somewhere. The key points for this, I guess, is that every 10 minutes there's a cyber attack in Australia. 60,000, 3.5 billion a year, and 2.8 million Aussies experience some kind of disruption due to this problem. There are a number of organisations out there that are responsible for these type of attacks. One of the more well-known one is the Dark Side Hacking Group. There was a Colonial Pipeline in America that they're known for, so it's a pretty big high-status one. The FBI managed to shut them down. The problem is that two new groups appeared that were allegedly linked to this group, and very quickly they were on the dark web asking to purchase access to infected networks in the US and Australia and Canada and the UK. And they're actively recruiting partners and affiliates who are willing to pay to get access to the compromised computer networks. So it's not just one thing anymore. It's not like you have to have the skills to do the whole thing. You can actually buy ransomware as a service. So all you need to do is put your logo on, establish your own Bitcoin merchant facility. You set up a small team of people in a third world country on the phones, and you've got yourself a little business there. And what these guys are doing now is they're actually not even attacking the networks themselves, they're just advertising on the dark web. So people that just have the skills to get access to a system can actually sell that to these bigger organisations who then have the structure to execute it. It's a lot more professional than it used to be. It's essentially a lot of these organisations are run better than professional software organisations. Some of the frameworks, just to touch on, I don't want to go into too heavy information in regards to that because there's a lot to do in that regard. Probably the best one to be aware of is this thing called the Essential 8. And I'll talk about that in the next slide, but the government is pushing the Essential 8. And it's basically 8 areas of your business that you need to look at to make sure that you're complying in those areas. There's a whole lot of other frameworks. There's like ISO 27001. We've been involved in implementing some of those. My suggestion very strongly would be that unless you're being required to go to that level because of you're dealing with a government department or a big contractor or defence or something that is demanding it, it's a very big hammer. It's quite overbearing, and it's probably more than most businesses need. And like I said, we've been involved in that, but it's a lot of work for a very small return. Whereas you can cover sort of the 80-20 rule. If you start with Essential 8, you're going to cover most things. It's probably a better strategy. There's also a whole lot of acronyms: NIST, NERC, CISP. Different industries have different standards and different frameworks that they use. If you're in the financial services, there's a particular one for that. You'll know what that is, and you'll know if you need to comply with that. And so if you don't know about it, I wouldn't get too fussed about trying to get up with the latest one. Just start with Essential 8. That's all you really need to worry about. You can access that from the Australian Cyber Security Centre website, which is cyber.gov.au. Huge resource for all of this type of information. And you can download an Essential 8 maturity model document. I've actually got my guys working on building a better, easier to understand one based on the latest version that came out a few weeks ago. So if you drop me an email, I will send you the easy to use one, or ring me or whatever. I'll send when it's finished. I'll send it out to you. It's easy to understand. The problem with that one, it's a little bit hard to use. So we're doing something a bit better. The other thing that's being talked about in the industry is that they're saying within the Cybersecurity Centre, the talk is that the government are looking to try to encourage businesses to implement the Essential 8. And how they're doing that is what I'm hearing is that there's talk about them maybe linking grants to, so that'll be a prerequisite. If you're dealing with the government, you're getting a grant, it'll be, well, show us your status meeting Essential 8, and then we'll give you that. That'll be a prerequisite to deal with the government. Presumably at some point I can see that a bit like health and safety standards, environmental standards and quality standards for bigger companies, I can see that Essential 8 will be probably the default standard. I can see it not being too far away where bigger companies will say, well, we want you make sure that you have your ducks in a row in regards to this sort of thing. So you need to provide some sort of evidence that you're meeting that. In fact, I say that, I'm actually involved with a few companies that are doing exactly that. They've actually asked us to talk to their suppliers and their software providers and their different things to actually assess them against Essential 8, so they know that they're secure. I've actually recently terminated a relationship with a supplier of ours because I was unhappy with the way they were managing my access to my system. So that's a risk everybody needs to be thinking about. Not just are we doing this correctly in our business, but also does anyone have access to our system, and how are they managing their passwords, and what are their security systems like? And if you've got any doubts, because the risk is if they get hacked, then your data and access to your system gets access. So something to keep in mind there. Notifiable data breaches. So who does this apply to? Does anyone have any idea? To be very general, if you're turning over more than $3 million a year and you get hacked and you lose control of personal data, then you are obliged to report it, and failure to do so at risk of being prosecuted as to the Act. Is it law? Yes, it is. It's actually under the Privacy Act of 1988. It falls under. So who do you report it to? Well, it's the Office of Australian Information Commissioner. So that's who you need to report it to. And the question I get is, who do you ring first? In most cases, I would, if it was me under this situation, I'd be ringing my lawyer. That would be my first call. If you do that, you then have this, the privilege, confidential privilege situation that you can then have some control about what happens next. Quite often people just ring their IT company straight away. The IT company swings into action. I mean, you still need to stop access and you need to try and freeze things to stop things changing. But the issue is that quite often people will start wiping things and restoring things and you lose all the evidence of what happened. And that's a problem. If you're insured, for this type of thing, and I understand the insurance has gone up 10 times, a factor of 10x this year. So for what was $5,000 policies, now $50,000. So it's going up massively. But if you do have insurance, you then need to get the insurance company involved. They will send an incident manager and they actually run the show from there, which has its own challenges and risks. But if you're turning over that's certainly something to keep in mind. This is the biggest challenge I find when I talk to people about cybersecurity. Nobody can afford to spend any money on it, and things are tight and COVID and all the rest. However, when they ring me after they've been breached, when it's too late, they will literally give me their firstborn child to help, and it's one of those situations where it's just so hard to fix things after it's gone too far. I mean, we try and help where we can, but it would have been so much easier to stop it happening. And, I used to say 10% of the cost. I think it's more 5% of the cost now, or probably even less now, because it can completely destroy businesses. One of my favourite sayings is, email is the root of all evil. Question I like to ask people, is this email legitimate or fake? And my answer to that question is, I usually get 50-50 saying, oh yeah, no, it's legit, it's fake. My answer is, it doesn't matter, don't click on it. If you've received an email that you don't know why you're getting asked to click on it, then you do not click on it. If it somehow gets through, I've talked about there are a whole lot of advanced features in the newer platforms that stop suspect emails getting to you. The problem is that the hackers are fundamentally changing the game every day, and they're coming up with new ways. I just read an article this morning. They're actually splitting their malicious code into 4 different ways. So they can slide through your email system at the moment. This is a brand new thing because it's only a quarter of what it needed to do, and then when it's in your machine it downloads other things from other places and builds the actual malicious software on your machine and then executes from there. So you're not actually downloading the whole thing anymore. So because of that, it's designed to get through things. So point being is, if you need to educate your people and you need to say, if you don't know why you're getting this email, don't click on it, because it's not a good thing. You might have heard a term called phishing. That's a common cyber security issue in the industry. There's essentially 2 types. Phishing, which is just trying to hit anyone randomly, and spear phishing, where you actually specifically target a person within an organisation. And the average time for somebody to be in your system to execute spear phishing is 100 days, which people think, they get a breach, and then 20 minutes later their whole business is gone. In some cases that is true, but also there's a lot of cases now they find their way in, maybe through a printer. People don't understand that giving admin privileges to printers is a really high risk activity, or through some sort of method like that, or they trick one of your staff into clicking on an email they shouldn't. They get access, they sit and they look at people's diaries, calendars, they work out the structure of the organisation, and they wait for the CFO to go on holidays or the CEO to go on holidays, and then they launch their attack on the Thursday night before the guy goes on holidays. So it's very calculated and very well executed. So a couple of the key things there is the authority. So they're usually claiming to be someone official. Yep. So for instance, a common one, everyone's going to get a copy of my book. They're just being held up at the printers, but I'll make sure that everyone gets one sent out. There's a story in there about essentially a CEO going on holidays, and the CFO gets all these messages from the CEO saying urgently transfer this money to XYZ, and of course by the time the guy does that, you know, the money's gone. So there's a story in about that. It's usually from someone from authority. It's usually urgent, you've got to do it now. And it's usually got some sort of emotion in there to create tension and trick you into taking action. So yeah, that's what they do there. There's a whole bunch of dodgy SMSs going around at the moment. It's important to understand that criminals use email, phone and text to get you to do things that are not appropriate. And again, they put pressure on you to trick you into taking action. So that's a common thing. I try to keep these conversations pretty non-technical. I'm going to need to just explain something a little bit on the technical side, so I hope you bear with me. I'll try and make it as painless as possible. There's some things that you just need to understand. If you're involved in a business, you need to understand some technical things. So you can ask the questions of whoever's looking after this. Because again, we find in the companies that we go and do work for, I'd say nearly 100% where we go and investigate. Quite often our engagement is people say to us, we've got an IT company, we know everything's fine, can you just come and check a few things and make sure it's right? And almost 100% this is done incorrectly. So I'm trying to educate people on how things work. So essentially how the internet works is that you register a domain name, and there's essentially two parts to that. To keep it simple, there's where your website files are hosted, and that just points to where your website files are, and then people can be directed to that location for traffic. Or the next one is to do with the mail server, so that's all your email and how that works. And what controls that is what's called your DNS records. To explain them very quickly and very gently, there's three different types. There's what we call SPF, DKIM, DKIM and DMARC. If you think about posting a traditional letter, the SPF record is to do with the envelope. So it's checking the envelope. Where's the address from the envelope? The DKIM actually looks at the letter and it says, well, is this letter from the right person? So that's the two layers of checking emails. DMARC, it's complicated how it works, but it basically uses those two facilities to do a further check and check that, you know, is this, if the letter's correct and the address is correct, the envelope's correct, the letter's correct, and chances are it's correct. So they're the three terms: SPF, DKIM and DMARC. Now, here's the point that you need to understand. SPF is really easy to set up, takes a few minutes. DKIM is a bit more involved, but it's still not great. So the effect of those two things, better than nothing, but not awesome. DMARC is hard to set up, hard to manage, additional cost to do it properly. When you're setting it up, you're probably going to lose emails. So you turn it on and suddenly emails aren't working. It works very well, and it's a must-have all these days, and you need all three. And typically we see this not set up properly. Not set up at all, actually. You know, they'll put a SPF in, but then the others probably not. So here's the question you need to ask your IT provider. Can I please see the bill for setting up DMARC alerts? Because it takes time and costs money. Can I see the DMARC reports? Because what's different about DMARC is that it actually generates, when there's a problem, it sends information to a third party, and then you can get a report on what the problem is. So that costs money. To have that facility to generate those alerts and the reports, that costs additional money. So what is the ongoing cost for DMARC? So that's the questions to ask. Because obviously everyone will go and ask the question, have we got our DNS records set up correctly? The answer, yep, they're fine. Well, here's the actual question you ask. After you've asked that and say, well, can I see, you know, the bill for setting it up and how much the ongoing cost is, because it ain't free. There's a number of ways you can actually execute training within your organisation without it costs breaking the bank. I just picked, I'm not affiliated with this organisation, I just did a Google search. This is the first one to come up. There's a whole bunch of them. How this works is you set it up, you run it in your organisation, you can actually send suspect emails to your people, they'll accidentally click on them. It's best to train them first, but this is a way of reinforcing it. They'll click on a suspect email, it'll give you a report, and then it'll give you an opportunity to have a conversation with a person and say, you remember you're not supposed to be clicking on emails that aren't legit. So that gives them that. Right, if you bear with me, I'll just play another video.
Every business wants to keep their valuable data safe, but sometimes, without help, it can be hard to identify or stop a breach that would be catastrophic for your business. Right now, our really own ethical hacker is going to show you an example hack that is used every day to get full access to business critical sensitive data, and worst of all, he'll even pretend to be you. This is called a man-in-the-middle attack. In this exclusive example, it's instigated by a typical quarantine review email. Our hacker has worked carefully to make sure it gets through to your main inbox, and looks completely legitimate. But wait, look, the URL has a slight spelling mistake most would miss. If you were to see that a message from a colleague has been caught in spam, you'd be compelled to click review to find out more. This is called man in the middle because, in this case, there's a login portal that appears to be genuine, and it's sat right in between you and the real system you're trying to access. Again, there's that tiny spelling mistake. So you enter your credentials, they get passed through and allow you normal access. But at the same time, if we check our hacker's machine, they've also collected your username and password, meaning whatever you can access, they can access. Just imagine what they can now do. Steal your client information, wipe your data, and even email using your identity. Hackers are well known for resending invoices, asking payment details to be amended, stealing thousands. All of this without you suspecting a single thing, potentially for days, weeks, even months, until you finally change your password.
Moving on to backups. Backups are absolutely critical. They're pretty much a subject for another complete hour's discussion. There's a lot in them and people massively underestimate them. The key thing is, according to this study, only the failure rates are at, backup failure rates are at 37%. I actually think that it's way higher than that. I actually read that because my understanding is 40% backups work. That's my experience. So I actually think the numbers are worse than what's being portrayed here, but anyway, that's what Computer Weekly said. Backup failures hit a high as pandemic working hits from home. That's the survey they did. So best practice with backups is implement an automatic backup system, and not all automatic backup systems are the same, and then do a complete restore twice a year. That was the message coming out of My Budget when we spoke to the guy from My Budget. He said that, yeah, we knew we had everything backed up. We were totally sure it was going to work. It's a total pain to have to do a full restore and put all the bits back together and check it. So they didn't do it, and of course they paid the price. And now they do it twice a year regardless. Just on backups, you know, it's very important. And look, I'm more than happy if you have any questions about backups and you talk to your IT company and they don't give you clear answers. If you want to give me a call or drop me an email, I'm more than happy to have a quick 5-minute chat about giving you some advice on that. But just be careful, because they're not all the same, and they quite often don't restore, which is the key thing. They're not immune to ransomware, and that's a key problem. And I guess the question that I ask is that if you're doing backups and you're confident they work, that's great, but do you do a regular restore from backup? And I haven't seen anyone put a hand up ever in any of the presentations I've done, so I'm pretty sure that's not happening in most cases, and pretty much is the only way really to check that you've got it covered. And I would suggest that even if you don't commit to every 6 months, you at least go and do it now. Make that a priority now. Can we do a full restore and for backup? Can we recover those files? Again, ask your IT partner, can you show me evidence of the last time you did a full backup and restore of my complete system? Another way of asking a similar question, this will give you an indication of the quality of the backup system, is you go in and you delete an email from two years ago, or you find a file that you know you haven't played with for 2 years. Let's say you delete it, and then you say, can I please have that file? It's missing now. Can you please give it back to me? And just see how that is dealt with. We use a particular product called Backup 365. It keeps copies of everything for 10 years, and it's undeletable. So if anyone is using it and they're doing downloading anything inappropriate, well, you know, should there be an investigation, we cannot delete it. It's there for 10 years. Now, the good thing about that is that it's there for 10 years. So if we do have a problem, we've got copies going back for 10 years. And again, there's issues with backups because a lot of the backup systems, what they do is they try and save money on storage space. So they'll do a backup every day, let's say for the first few weeks. Then after a month or two, they'll delete all of them except for one a week. Then they'll delete a few months out, one a month. And so the granularity gets pretty bad the further you go out. So if you go back 5 years or 3 years, you're starting to get into a situation where you might miss things. The challenge with that, it's fine if you don't need it, but if you have a legal case or something like that, where you need every bit of correspondence that was said on a project that didn't go so well, for instance, then that's when you're in trouble, that you need that sort of thing. Ransomware. So according to Encrypt, a business suffers a ransomware attack every 14 seconds. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre assesses ransomware as the highest threat. And I've got a great video on what ransomware is and how it works. So let me just, there's the mouse there.
How do you go in the space of just 1 minute from running a busy, thriving and rewarding business to the utter despair and panic that comes with an IT breach that compromises your vital systems? We're about to show you right now. What you're about to see is rarely captured on video, an actual real-life hack that could devastate any business. How would it feel to see this on your computer? Every single file on your machine encrypted, locking you and all other users on your network out of every single file and system. This is the result of ransomware, sent via email. Most of us would say we're quite savvy when it comes to email security. If a dodgy email hasn't already been automatically sent to the spam folder, we can usually tell when someone is trying to exploit us over email. But what about this one? It's the kind of email you'd normally expect from them. The address sending it looks legitimate, but wait. Although it's very similar, that's not their real address. This email is actually fake, sent from our hacker asking you to do something quite normal. Download a PDF guide. We click the link, the PDF opens. The URL hosting the PDF seems legitimate. There's even a padlock indicating the site is secure. But now we can see things from the hacker's point of view. They've used some special hacking software to send this fake email and monitor the ransomware attack. The moment you click the link in that email and open the PDF, the hacker was given full access to your computer, inviting them to launch a business-critical attack with a single click. Back on your machine, you happily close the PDF, minimize your browser to show your desktop, and there it is. You see for the first time something isn't right. Now when you try to open any file, there's nothing there. Every single file on your machine has been encrypted, locking you out. But not just on your machine, even affecting others on your network, plus connected cloud accounts like Dropbox and any other people you share your files with. This is a very real threat, and you've just seen firsthand the deployment of an actual ransomware attack that brings businesses and organisations to their knees every day.
So you can see that the quality of the documents that are being sent through, even the emails that are being sent through, is quite high now. And it's not, we're all sort of used to seeing the ones that are written very badly, where, it's probably from a country where English isn't their first language. And you can very easily see those things, but it's getting way more sophisticated now and very, very hard to spot. This is not how all ransomware works. This is just a bit of a simplistic view of some of the ransomware. But just to give people an idea, because they think that they think they can sort of outsmart it and they can't. So essentially, you click on a link, suspect link, ransomware is downloaded to your machine. It scans for attached drives first. So it goes out and looks for backups, USB drives, Ethernet drives, network access storage, servers. Backup files are encrypted, network files are encrypted, desktop files are encrypted, so they're the last thing in the chain. So then at the end of all that, when all the damage is done, you receive a message to pay a ransom, and then you quickly try and disconnect your PC from the network. It's a bit too late. By the time you realise it's too late, it's done. So I've heard, the actual time to do this is about 20 minutes, but by the time you see it, it's too late. So you're done. Passwords, you can spend all the money you want on cybersecurity, but if you reuse your passwords, then you're essentially wasting your money. And it's certainly something we need to educate our employees about, our team members, because remembering passwords is a hassle, and managing passwords is a hassle. And we're moving to a world, and Microsoft and others are actually trying to move to implement systems away from passwords, and I probably won't get into that to too much detail right now, but that's where we're going. We're going to a world where we don't need to remember passwords, but for now we do. And so just to give you some examples, in the industry that I work in, which is the IT industry, there's a product called SolarWinds, one of the key players worldwide. So if you imagine all of their customers actually have, with your IT department, how they can log into your PC and take control and send reports back. That's what this tool does. It does that. This is one of the main players. They were hacked, and they were being identified as, the problem was they used this password SolarWinds123. Now we all laugh at that and think how silly that is, but I've done work for an Adelaide software company, and I won't tell you their name because you'll know their password. Their password is their name and then XYZ at the end, and that gets you access to most things. And as far as I know, it's still like that. So yeah, so that's a thing to be aware of. It sounds like, how would that happen? But I'm telling you, we come across this all the time. So passwords, is it possible that you've used your same password for your Facebook, your Spotify, your LinkedIn, your Netflix, and your banking, your work account? If so, the hackers probably already have your name and password. I actually have a facility on my website, which I can show you if you're interested, where you can actually put your details in and you can see where it's been, which systems has been breached. So I can probably show that if people are interested at the end. Here's how you create a strong password.
Computer, establish a security code for access to all functions previously transferred to Bridge.
Enter code.
17346732147 Charlie 327897777 643 Tango 732 Victor 731178888 732476789764376 Lock.
Security code intact for all specified inquiries and orders.
So that's pretty easy to remember things like that. But you just need to create one of those, a unique one of those for every system that you use, and then you'll be fine. So what, I'll tell you how to solve that in a second. But we're suggesting now that where possible, use a 24-character random generated password for every site, or as many, like that, as many characters as you can. So some of them will only fit 16, but if you can do 24, you do 24. Every site has a unique password. I've said it twice because it's super important that every site you access has a unique password. So if you get compromised, they only get one password. Because let's say you might be using that email address on 20 different systems. If you use the same password and email address, they've got access to all 20. Use a password manager. That's the secret to all of this. Again, I'm not associated with either of these. These are just two that I know are good. There's one password. There's a whole bunch of them. There's KeyPass. Pick the one of your choosing. I know for LastPass we use that. You can get a free account for personal use. So that means you have one password to access LastPass, and then it manages your 300 passwords to every different individual system. Works on your phone, works on your PC, works as a browser extension. Zoho Vault is for, well, I've got the enterprise version of LastPass for my team. I've also used Zoho Vault in the past. It's actually the next step up. A bit more complicated, takes more time to use, but is a bit more powerful. So depending on your business requirements, that might be worth suggesting. Again, if you just give me a call if you want a quick 5-minute chat on that. I'm happy to give you my thoughts. And turn on multi-factor authentication everywhere. So what multi-factor authentication is where a lot of things you deal with at the moment, whether it's dealing with the ATO or dealing with your online things, where they text you an SMS with a number, and then you put that in. So you try and log in with your username and password, and before you get access, it says, well, I need to identify that you are who you say you are. There are apps to do this. There are text. One of the bottom line is turn it on for every system, every time, and use it for absolutely everything. Just a little side note, SMS multi-factor is better than nothing, but it's not totally secure. There have been incidents where they've been breached using SMS. One of my guys that was going to be here today that can't make it, he's really against, and every time one of our customers wants to use SMS, he's talking about it. There are authentication apps that work way better. His view is if he can hack it, then we shouldn't be telling our customers to do it, so I'm taking that on board. That's to keep that in mind. So here's what I'd be asking my IT partner. How are you managing passwords to my systems? And I've made a bit of a flippant comment here saying, are they stored on a spreadsheet, a whiteboard, or another unsecure system? But one of the activities we did for one of our customers, one of their providers was using a whiteboard. So, if you're visiting that thing and you take a screenshot, then you've got access to their customers. So just something to keep in mind there. Okay, 5 key things to remember. Ring the email sender if you get an unexpected or unusual email, and don't use the phone number in the email. Use their trunk line or the one that's advertised as on their website as their main phone. Never open attached links. Just don't do it. Don't open emails that are not part of your job. You saw that pretty sophisticated version of the ATO document. My view is that the accounting department and the people that are actually, dealing with the ATO, they're dealing with the ATO already. Sending them that email is not a good idea because they'll already be dealing with the ATO in their own thing. So don't forward them on. Just delete them, and if they've got through, don't open them. It's just creating more noise and more trouble. The other thing I recommend very strongly is unsubscribe from every email marketing list that you're on that isn't absolutely essential for your job. What happens is over time we click on things, we download a document, we put our email address in to get something in, and the list just grows, and it's not uncommon for people to have 1,000 unread emails in their inbox that aren't important, but it's taken up space. When you keep allowing noise into your email box, what happens is that you get too many things in there and too many opportunities to click the wrong thing. So just unsubscribe to everything that's not essential. You'll find, you know, it's a bit more of a carefree life, you know, reducing stress and that anyway. Be vigilant with things that don't feel right, and never make financial decisions on email information alone. All right, like I said, I've got a book. Unfortunately, the printers have let me down. They're not here today, but we'll make sure we post them out to everyone as part of that. We've also offered some free consulting hours to people who are enrolled in the first 10 people or whatever. So I'll let Mel advise who those people are, and we'll be honouring that. So happy to do that. And I guess really at this point I'd ask, are there any questions?
How'd you come up with the name, people?
For my well, I think it's probably pretty obvious. I was, yeah, it was one of those things I was advised. It was a 50-50 split. People, I said, this is what I'm thinking of calling it, and half them said, I don't think you should, for obvious reasons. And then I went, you know what, screw it. That's if you know me, I talk like that all the time anyway. Yes.
Of the customers you dealt with that have experienced data breaches, what quantity of those have insurance in your experience?
Very low. Yeah, it's very low. And like I said, the challenge is the price in the insurance. It's just skyrocketing at the moment. So yeah.
So I'm just going to make a couple of observations and a question. So on the observations, on privacy and notifiable data breaches, Julian and I are IT lawyers, so
yep.
Just to mention that it's not only people with turnovers above 3 million, it's healthcare providers and also people whose business it is to collect personal information or data like that.
Sure.
But also there's quite a serious possibility that that $3 million small business exemption will be removed in the next months or years.
Gotcha.
And that everyone, basically, any business, no matter how small, will be stuck with the privacy regime that applies to notifiable data breaches.
Thanks for adding that.
Yeah, that's quite serious. I mean, it's great for lawyers, but you know, we're lucky. But it's actually a severe.
Just to go on to that, is the other thing that people don't get is, my understanding is it's only, you need to lose access to essentially one record.
Yeah. So what is a serious data breach, I suppose? And you know, one record could be very serious for one person, I guess.
Yeah.
So you've got to assess it. There's a bit of subjectivity there. You know, if you can avoid having to tell the commissioner about it, then you know you'd find a way perhaps. But just sometimes you just got to own up. And there's a lot of them now. You produce a report. You produce a report every 3 months, and it's up to about 500 a quarter or something like that of notifiable data breaches in Australia.
Yes.
My one question was, I mean, with the man in the middle invoicing, the netball guys, do you really have to phone every time you want to pay an invoice to make sure that the account?
No, it was.
Very easy way of doing it.
No, it's really so. What actually happens is that it's not just that example, but generally what happens is that an email gets intercepted, like an invoice gets intercepted. They change it in some way and they update the banking details, and so it's an existing invoice that hasn't been paid. They're usually in the system and they're looking at the ones that haven't been paid, and therefore then they find one that's sufficiently big enough. They redo the invoice, they put the new banking details in, they then send it to and maybe I wasn't clear on how that happened, but there's been a few that I've seen like that. They then send it to the place and they're demanding, you must pay this thing now urgently, and here's our new banking details. So the issue is that if the banking details have changed, don't just assume based on that email that that's the thing. No, you're right, you wouldn't want to ring every invoice, but
that's the trigger point, you know, so that we're changing our banking details.
That's it. That's absolutely correct. Inyo?
Just further on that, I just had a new kitchen put in, and the builder said to me, I'll send you an invoice and I'll also send you a text with my invoice details, the bank details. So that was his double check. So he's obviously been caught, and he wanted to make sure that the two match.
And our bank has, I do like the cyber security thing through our bank. And they've also said you should never list your invoice details on your invoice. Yeah.
Sorry, what was that? What did they say?
They said to take your banking details off your invoice.
But then you have got to ring up. Wow.
Because most the bank's security, like their guarantee of covering that money is dependent on you complying with all these security things, and that's one of them.
That's interesting. Yeah, good to know. Yes.
Seems like there's a lot of protection, there's a lot of awareness around it. Obviously, there's a lot of cost to business involved in that. With your dealings with the ACSC, what's sort of the government doing to try and stop these groups? I mean, is it really here, or is it a case that they can't be caught? Or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a meeting with the SA Police, who are a lovely bunch of guys, but there's only just a handful of them, and they're like they're doing their best, but their workload is way too much for them to cope with, in my opinion. So locally we have that, and I think they're just completely overloaded with the amount of things. There was a few. What the government has done is that they did have a few grants out they were offering for companies like ourselves to do these sort of presentations to help with the education. So that they've done that, but outside of that, I'm not seeing a lot, to be honest. I'm not seeing a lot. I think there definitely would, there is probably scope for, offering grants for people to actually implement. And I think there was in the past. I think there was some grants for some companies, but they obviously are very limited and get snapped up so quickly. It's now, I guess, such a widespread problem that it's considered the business's responsibility now. And there's not a lot I'm really seeing.
I guess you sort of think, you think of the web as this global being and hackers being maybe based in other countries. I mean, but there must be groups of people that do it locally.
I presented a similar thing like this about a month ago, and one of the business owners, same story that you've heard 1,000 times. His CEO was given a demand when he went on holiday. His CEO was given a demand, exactly the same story as I wrote in the book. He thought that I stole his story. Anyway, yeah, and they found out it was a lady who was essentially a housewife in Sydney somewhere. They managed to track it back. So you're right, it's people in Australia. In fact, I saw a study recently, and it was about the Asia Pacific area. In Australia, is really there's people in Australia doing this. So let's not just blame people overseas. You saw the quality of the PDF document from the ATO and that. So there's people in Australia that are doing this. So don't think it's people overseas. It's not hard at all to make your computer appear like it's overseas. So it means that there's one extra level of things being a bit more harder to track. So you can actually you can build a PC, set it overseas, and therefore it's harder for people to roll up at your house. You wouldn't just. The people that are doing this are smart, are really, really, really smart. They're not just the average person that would just get their home PC, connect via their local, Atom internet or whatever, and then, be easily tracked back. It's a lot more sophisticated than that. You can set up a virtual PC in the other part of the world, do whatever you want, and make it very hard to track it back to you. So, yeah, I've seen some pretty sophisticated stuff. Anything else?
Oh, quick question
Yep.
about the authenticator apps that you mentioned earlier. You were saying so don't use the SMS services, or only maybe use that if that was the only option, I suppose, or something.
Yeah, it's better than nothing, and as a first point, it's better than nothing. I guess it's probably 95% effective. You just need to be aware that it's not 100% effective, because people think I've now got multi-factor authentication turned on. I'm getting this SMS, it's completely solid, and now I'm covered. It's not completely solid, and there is a better way. So I know it's a hassle to download an authenticator app and set that up, and there's more, to and froing, but it is the better way to go. And I think that, if you want the best level of security, then you would start moving away from SMS, because there has been some cases where people have fallen compromised to breaches because of that.
Is there any in particular you'd recommend over others, or are they all relative?
Well, I'm a Microsoft partner, so I use Microsoft Authenticator for everything. Yeah, so that's.
But I imagine the Google one is okay.
It probably is. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's Authy, which is used at a lot of things like Xero, for instance, works with Authy. So I can't really comment on some of the others because we tend to, if there's a Microsoft product that fits a gap, we just use that and support that. And so I don't really know outside of that sort of thing too much. That's all right. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, look, thank you for your time, and thanks for coming and participating in this event. Hopefully you've got something out of it. I understand there's a lunch being provided shortly, so Mignon, do you know where that'll be provided, or?
It'll be brought into here. It'll be ready in about 10 minutes.
Okay, no worries. All right. Well, thank you everyone, and any questions, please let me know.
Thanks very much.
No worries. Thanks. Thank you.